Welcome back to Conversations with History. My name is Greg Norman, your host. We are lucky enough to have with us legendary assistant coach, Doug Monforton, who spent a number of years in Clarkston and a variety of places. You've been inducted for 2021 to the Michigan High School Lacrosse Coaches Hall of Fame. First of all, Doug, I think there's not a better guy to be honored, so congratulations on being the first in the assistant coaching ranks.
Thanks, Greg. I very much appreciate it. Continue to be on cloud nine after the announcement last night. And as I told Brian and I told you, I am honored and humbled to be in that class.
You know, Doug, the easiest place to start for us, I think, is going all the way back to Austin Catholic, which is on the east side of town. And in a day when, I don't want to show your age, but this is a day and age when there was probably, I think, 30 or 40 high schools, small division, Class E, Class D. Talk a little bit about life in the Catholic school and the CYO in those days.
That was the old Catholic League back in the day. De La Salle, the old Catholic Central, the old Notre Dame, Salesian, Detroit Cathedral. It was, we played football there, and there never was a day off. I think one of the highlights for me back in high school was that our class was the first class to play Alpha Casa at Brother Rice.
Really?
Back in the day when Leon Hart Jr. was on the team. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but I still do.
There's like four guys that'll watch this and will remember that. The rest of us won't, but that dates you. So you graduated from Austin, what, 65, 66?
67.
67.
1967.
So that's a long time ago. What was the reason behind having so many Catholic schools? Because it was just an extension of the parish and the K-8? Is that kind of the deal was?
Exactly right. Back in the day, there was, if you swung a cat by the tail, you'd hit a Catholic church. And, as you went through grade school, you'd pick a high school to go to and you just stay in the program. But as people left the city, the parishes dried up, the high schools dried up, and people just moved to the suburbs.
With consolidation, that's why you have the Brother Rices and the Orchard Lakes and some of the schools. It's funny, one of the guys that was in this, and is in our hall, Bob Dowd, who's the athletic director at Troy Athens, he's from Central New York, and he says the only way you can distinguish a public school from a private school is it's got an ST period in front of it. And he always knew if it was a saint that anything other than a Catholic school, it was a public school, so it was really easy to distinguish.
Right.
Did you go K-8 as well, Catholic school?
Yes. Yeah, I went, actually K through 12. I went to St. Ignatius over on East Side, then Austin, and then I went down to St. Joe's in Indiana.
Now, you were a typical athlete. You didn't play lacrosse in high school.
No, did not. Played football and ran track and field.
What was your specialty in track?
The 100-yard dash and the 220.
Wow, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
So from there down to St. Joe's?
St. Joe's down in Rensselaer, Indiana.
Why there? Because it was another saint in front of it?
It's a place my dad wanted me to go to be honest with you. My choices were limited. I was waitlisted at Harvard and Yale, and so I figured, wow, what the heck, I might as well go to St. Joe's.
What, did you go down to play? Did you play sports in college?
I played some football in college, and I finally ran into it was the Peter principle. I got to the point where guys were bigger, stronger, and faster, and I just couldn't keep up. So I had a couple of years, and that was it.
What was your major in college?
Business administration, minor in finance, and a minor in physical education.
What did a 21 or 22-year-old Doug Monforton decide he wanted? What did he thought about doing when he was 30? Do you have any idea?
Sales has always been my background. My dad was in sales. My peer group all went into sales at some point, and it was a natural for me. So my first job was in Indianapolis, and we were down there for 5 or 6 years. Our oldest was born down there. We moved out to Salt Lake City for a couple of years and came back when the twins were born, and we've been in Detroit ever since.
You're kind of in a unique position. You have an athletic background, but you didn't play lacrosse until you got, the easiest thing is to get into the lacrosse part of it. What got you involved, and where did you get involved?
My good friend Dave White, who is a Hall of Famer,
Right.
I believe the class of 2019, started it. They had a meeting at Mhslca High School, and my son was part of the meeting. Came back and said, "Dad, I want to play lacrosse." Okay, have a nice day. Where you go? So we met with Dave. There was about 8 of us that met with Dave, and it was our charge to get, at some point, recognized by Mhslca High School as a varsity sport. So we set off on a 2.5-year journey to get that done, and it worked. There was 8 of us dads that did it, and while I was doing that, I spent, Dave White has a unique way of getting people involved in what's going on.
How?
So he drew a whole bunch of us in, and back then there was Stan Zidell on his staff, Dave Wilson, and I came on board. And it's been, I didn't spit the bit for 25 years.
When you first step out on a lacrosse field with no lacrosse background, explain that? Because it's
Wow. It's it's more about volume than it is about teaching. And as you become more comfortable in your skin as to what you're trying to accomplish, the volume goes down and the teaching picks up. But it was a struggle. I mean, we got virtually no help from the administration at Mhslca, which is not telling tales out of school. It's just a fact. And God bless Dave he was a bulldog in getting that thing through, and it was great. And there are kids now that are friends of my son that still talk about playing at Bloomfield. I mean, it's lacrosse. Once you get into it, it's in your blood. It's just the way it is.
Did you know pretty much the first 6 months it was all consuming to you?
Yeah. Well, I'll bet you, no kidding, Greg, I talked to Dave White 300 days a year for 4 years, just about stuff, lacrosse and recruiting and discipline and just stuff. And he was a wonderful font of information. He never said no, never, always had time. It was great. It was terrific.
What was the first year? You ever year-wise?
1994.
Okay, so Bloomfield had their first team as a varsity sport in the Mhslca when? 95?
95.
95.
Yeah.
So it took about a year to develop. And that,
right.
You guys were part of that sort of third surge. You had the original 6, then you had a number of other private schools. And you guys were kind of the first group that started 94, 95 as we kind of grew through 98, 99 when we went from 8 or 10 or 12 in that Division 4. Waterford and Plymouth and a lot of those other schools kind of developed at the same time.
Right, exactly. That's, it exploded. It went from a handful, Orchard Lake St. Mary and Brother Rice, De La Salle, that bunch. And then all of a sudden in 2 years, there was 25 or 30 teams. And then we started knocking on the MHSAA door. Aaron Frank did that. God rest, he was terrific at that. And once the momentum started, away she went.
How long did you work with Dave at Bloomfield?
I worked with Dave until he left the program, which was about 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
And then he left, and then Don Gay came on for a couple of years.
Okay, so you were under Don's staff as well?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, let me go backwards a little bit. When I was in California, I was asked to help out with some lacrosse, and the joke is I asked where the rink was, and I literally had to go get a better, lacrosse book for dummies. I knew how to catch and pass. I understood those kinds of things. When you have a bunch of dads, and in this case you have Dave Wilson, so Dave played in high school, but where do you go? I mean, is it one of those things you go to camp? I mean, what did you do to make yourself, better at coaching?
Went to camps. We would go out to Philadelphia and Baltimore to the conventions out there and just take reams and reams of notes, talk to all the coaches that would have the courtesy to sit down and talk with us. And I found out that the guys out east were more than helpful with us. I mean, sit down with a couple of beers and these guys would open their soul. It was wonderful. It was, and I did the convention thing for 18 years, and there wasn't a year went by I didn't learn something when I was out there. I mean, it was great. I was really impressed with the coaches, especially with their willingness to impart all kind of information. I mean, it was great. There was no secrets. Everybody talked to everybody about everything. It was great.
Did you ever figure out when you felt like you were competent? Was there ever that point?
No, it's not to this day. Not, it's the old deal. You fake it till you make it. I've been soft shoeing this thing for a long time, and they still haven't caught up with me yet.
I find that to be, the more I talk, it's like we taught goaltending, we taught certain ways to go, and then there's a kid from Cleveland State who's now at the Princeton as a Princeton's goaltending coach, and he's revolutionizing the idea that he did a thesis paper on it. Come to find out that all the angles that we used because we taught like goalies for hockey, turns out it doesn't apply to lacrosse. And we've gone from the U to a rectangle, and we've just become much more aggressive in the process. And this is a guy who's 27 years old who did a thesis on it, and he did the angles and all the physics. And you can't argue with stats, right? You can't argue with fact. Right. And we started using the same process, and the guys in the PLL are doing the same kind of thing. So from Dave's staff to Don's staff, you were how long at Bloomfield overall?
Brian and I left for Clarkston. Brian succeeded Don Gay, and we were there for.
We're talking about Brian Kamiskas, who was
Brian Kamiskas. Yes,
okay.
Brian and his dad Frank, his brother Mike, and Brian's other brother Frankie. They all came over. It was like the Kamiskas Mafia took the whole thing over. It was great.
Okay, so let me back up a little bit. Brian, wasn't the Kamiskas family involved in Eisenhower or over on that side of town?
They were in Eisenhower, and then they were over at Cranbrook. And it's my understanding that Brian and the bunch came from Cranbrook over to Bloomfield. Okay,
so Don left and Brian became the head coach of Bloomfield.
Correct.
Which would have been about 2004 or 5?
Yeah, something like that. And, I mean, there were some eyes that were open because at that time, Brian was probably 25 years old or something like that. And the people in Bloomfield, there's a certain way for them to do things. I mean, they've got a real narrow comfort zone. And, when Brian came in and his dad brought a lot of credibility to that, but Brian was the guy. And it took a long time for them to accept the fact that it was his program and he knew what he was doing. And he had a vision as to what he wanted at Bloomfield. And it was a struggle. I mean, we struggled with the administration. We struggled with the parents. It was a full-time job.
You may not remember this, and I want to say it was 2005, but Waterford actually came over to Bloomfield and played you guys in a regional semifinal. And
I don't remember that. What I do remember, not to get off the subject, is first time you and I met when I was coaching at Avondale.
Right.
And we played Waterford and lost in double overtime 3-2. Right. Not that I hold that against you, but you did beat me 3-2.
Well, we'll come back to that story because I want to hit on that. But I think our first tenure was getting back to. So Brian, how long was Brian the head coach? 2 years at Bloomfield, right?
2 or 3, something like that.
Okay. So then at that point, you decide that this is a good combination. You guys worked well together. I'm assuming that friendships developed and.
Oh, it was great.
You went to Clarkston and then came back to Avondale. Is that correct, or did you go to Avondale first?
I went to Avondale first. In fact, I sat down with Brian and his dad when I found out that Avondale was open, and because I was an assistant coach, that's what I do. And Big Papa Frank Sr. said, you ought to take the head job at Avondale. Be a good time. They're in flux. It's a mess over there. You can straighten things out. So I went over and interviewed, and it's the first, last, and only time I interviewed as a head coach, and ended up with the job. But it was on a shoestring. I think we had 15 players max, and the parents supported it. God bless the kids. They played their heart out, but there was nothing there, and they had no backing from the administration, none.
How long were you the head coach at Avondale? 2 years?
1 year.
1 year.
1
I'll
year.
tell you what go ahead.
And then after that, we went to Clarkston.
You say we, you're talking about you.
Well, then I went back. I talked to Brian, and Brian said, "Hey, look, we have an opportunity to do something big out at Clarkston." And I said, "What do you mean we, Mhslca?" So we went out and interviewed and talked to the parents and saw the facilities, and away you go.
If Avondale would have been the kind of program that would have been a little more successful, would we be inducting you in the Coaches Hall of Fame rather than the Assistant Host Hall of Fame, or were you just happy being sort of the guy in the background?
That's a good question. I enjoyed my time as the head coach. I took some of my ex-players from Bloomfield as assistants, which was great. I really enjoyed that. But the system at Avondale at that time was set up for failure. I mean, I wanted to be with a program. My goal had always been to win a state championship as someone who'd never played. That's how I set that aside right from the get-go. And Avondale was not, they had no interest in doing that. They just wanted to compete. They wanted something for the kids to do in the off season from football.
I get your idea of setting your goals high, but winning a state championship at Avondale with Brother Rice down the street, was that a reasonable goal to be set?
No, it wasn't. But you shoot high, and even if you miss, you're still in good shape.
Well,
but the kids I had were great. The parents were supportive. It just, you need the whole family to make that thing work, and they didn't have it.
What I remember was you were part of Avondale and Waterford were both part of the OAA, so we played you in a league match. So we thought we would come over and it would be relative. We had a decent team. I want to say we were 12-5 that year. We could come over and and all of a sudden we're watching a team that I don't think had the talent that we had. And I'm not saying we had a lot of talent, but we were certainly better than what I thought was at Avondale at that point. And a bigger team. I think I had 30 kids. And all of a sudden it's like, God, these kids know what they're doing. And it was the first time that I'd ever come on your landscape. And it was like, wow, this guy knows what he's doing, because they played well. And I think that's something that, so we thought, well, maybe Avondale is going to take off. But obviously, as you point out, there's issues. And from there, you take off and head towards Clarkston, because I forget the dentist name that Brian had taken over for.
It was, starts with an I don't remember his name. I'll remember it later on. I don't remember.
Yeah. And I think they had a go ahead.
I was going to say Schaefer, but that's not it.
No, it starts with an N, as I remember. It doesn't matter. Yeah. He's actually my dentist, and that was in those days. So we used to play them on a regular basis. But I also think the school district was looking to make lacrosse a legitimate sport at that point. Is that a fair statement?
I think it's a very fair statement.
So you and Brian show up. Talk about the early days of Clarkston and kind of what your role was. And let me be very specific, since you're going in as an assistant coach. Talk about that role as an assistant coach, the supportive role that it needs to be, and kind of what you ended up doing at Clarkston.
Well, I think the way to start is that when we went over there, we met with Dan Fife. And in meeting with Dan, it was a complete breath of fresh air from what I had to deal with at Avondale and what we had to deal with at Lasser, Bloomfield. Dan Fife is the greatest AD I've ever worked for. And right at that very first meeting, he said, unless you go to college, this will be as close to a college program as you'll see. And I will support that. So I'm thinking, this is great. So we walked around and saw the facilities, and they had wonderful infrastructure, tracks and gyms and all kinds of stuff.
This is the old high school,
sat down, kind of.
Doug, this is the old high school. It's not the new one.
No, it was the new one.
The new one, where it is now, or the one that was downtown where they used to play?
No, this is the one they have now.
Okay. So you went there when it was open. Okay.
Oh yeah, with the indoor track and.
Yeah. No,
it's wonderful. So Brian and I sat down and talked about how we're going to make this thing work, because we had the future kind of sitting right in front of us. Finally, we had support from the parents, we had support from the administration, and it was just a matter of making this thing work. So the way it worked out was that I would take care of like the preseason conditioning, and really the grunt work to get rid of all the kids that really weren't interested in playing. Just, they want to put their foot in the water. And my goal was to provide Brian and the whole team with kids in the spring that were prepared to play, both physically and emotionally. And I mean, we worked hard at that. I put a lot of time in from Labor Day through the first week we went outside. And I mean, we weren't the best skilled team the first several years, but man, we could play with anybody. I mean, we were in shape and ready to go, and these kids knew what was expected. They knew what it took to win, and they worked hard. They worked really hard.
Was your first year at 2008 or 2007?
I'm going to say 2007,
Okay.
but I can't be sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you have a discussion with a head coach in that beginning, and you're having that, it's sort of good cop, bad cop, is that a kind of an approach to it, or is that the wrong approach?
No, well, I don't want to say it's good cop, bad cop. It was like maybe bad cop, worse cop. If they could get through me, then going with Brian was like going on vacation.
Right.
So, and they knew what was expected. And in the succeeding years, we were able to prune away the kids that really weren't interested in playing. They, the guys that just wanted to participate, that really wasn't their program. The guys that wanted to compete and really move up the ladder, those are the guys that stayed with us and excelled.
Did you start with a program? Go ahead.
We built a culture out there, and I think it's going to this day. It's been a while since I've been there, but I mean, now as it filters down through the middle school, they know what's expected when you play lacrosse at Clarkston High School. And if you're not willing to put in the time and the effort, then it's not going to end well.
You and Brian were together 12 years?
Yes.
So when did you realize that you had arrived? Because I think I played you when I was at St. Mary's in 8 or 9, and at that point you guys hadn't really arrived, and I was fortunate enough to land in a situation where I had more talent than I ever had before. Yeah. And I remember playing you a couple years later and being surprised at how much. I mean, by 2011 or 12, you guys had really taken a turn upward.
Yeah, it was a steep spike after a while. You grow and you grow. You have some growing pains. You kind of backslide a little bit. People get frustrated. You prune those guys out. You move through, and all of a sudden you start getting some traction. And it was slow at first, and then it kind of a steep curve. And there were 3 years on the JV that I only lost 4 games in 3 years, and we were dominant. And those guys moved up to the varsity, and I'm not patting myself on the back. These were good kids. But when Brian got them and then took that next step up, these guys were ready to play. They were ready to go.
Do you like being assistant coach? Is that something you like?
Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. That's my comfort zone. I was always the head varsity coach, or the head JV coach, and the assistant varsity coach. But Brian gave me I had a free pass to do whatever I wanted within reason. So I spent, game day, I'd coach on the JV, move up to the varsity, and have my input there. When we got done with practice early at the JV, I'd go over to varsity and stick my nose into what was going on. So it was kind of a seamless transition for the kids. I mean, they knew I was around, and they knew that we were supporting what was going on and making sure that we're, everybody's pulling in the same direction.
As an assistant, and obviously at this point, Brian's not only a coach, your head coach, but he's also become a friend. So the relationships are built in those times of fire, as it were. My question to you is: you guys have a lot of conversation as a head coach and an assistant coach about the process, even almost a daily conversation? Because without that, if you don't have if you got the responsibility and no authority, it makes a bad place to be. And I think you had a kind of run of the park, as it were.
Yeah, I did. He gave me a lot of leeway, and I'm sure covered my tracks more than I'll ever know. But in retrospect, I kind of did the same for him. And, because you get parents that complain about this, that, and the other thing. And, we spoke as one voice. There was never, I knew my role, and I supported him 100%, and he was good with that. And his success was my success. And I was happy with that, just delighted.
I'm curious, with a person with a type A personality that you are, and I can say that because we've coached together, but as a type A personality, how do you work through in those days? And I'm saying this for somebody, if I'm an assistant coach, how do you work with a head coach? As a type A personality, how do you work with a head coach if you disagree? What was your process?
I'd yell and scream and then walk away and suck my thumb, and that'd be the end of it.
Okay.
No, honestly, we didn't have too many. We had some disagreements philosophically about some things, but 99% of the time we're all on the same page. Brian set the tone and said, this is what we want to do. You do whatever you have to do to achieve this goal, and I'll support you. And that's what we did. And I was blessed with wonderful assistant coaches on the JV. Most of them were dads, but they were great. And because everybody wanted to be part of the program. It was a thing to do. And I think it still is. Everybody wants to be part of a winner.
Well, when you're at Avondale, and not so much Bloomfield, but you're in Avondale, you go to Clarkston, all of a sudden in Clarkston, you have athletes. I love being at Waterford, but then I go to St. Mary's. Nothing against Waterford. They had some great kids. But then St. Mary's, it's just a different level of talent athletically. And then from there, you turn it into a lacrosse program that matters.
Well, the pool of athletes at Clarkston is huge. And there's a long lineage of their football program being wonderful, their basketball program being wonderful. So their heritage in athletics is long and strong. And the challenge was to get lacrosse up to that level where we could look K.R. Richards in the eye, the football coach, and say, hey, look, we can do this. We can help each other. And he was great. He was our sponsor for the first couple of years. And he kind of kept an eye on especially what I was doing, because I would take the kids that didn't play football in the fall, and then we'd take his football players in the spring, and he wanted to make sure that, that we were doing the right thing by him. And he was very supportive, very supportive.
Cool. The question I want to ask is, Dan Fife, the athletic director, almost required the program to be a top-notch program statewide, because that's what he expected. I'm assuming that was the process, and it goes back to the simple discussion. If you look at not so much the parochial schools like a Brother Rice or a Catholic Central, but if you look at Rockford, if you look at Clarkston, if you look at Lake Orion, it's driven from the bottom up a lot of times, rather than an athletic director who just supports it. And I think Clarkston is one of those few communities where it's supported both at an administration level, at the athletic level, and certainly from the community level. And
Absolutely.
That's a different place than what you're used to.
Oh yeah, it was. It's a small community up there, and they really, when they support something, they really support something. It was a big deal, and I think it still is a big deal to go to a lacrosse game. There's a lot of people there, and they have some very high expectations. And but the thing that I found really attractive was they put as much emphasis on academics as they do on athletics. That's just a requirement. So we would get, as I'm sure, and I know you did, we'd get weekly progress reports. And if you weren't up to snuff, you weren't around. And kids knew that if they missed practice, they weren't playing. So it was, it was a good incentive for these guys to toe the mark.
Don't rock so much. I'll cut this out, but don't rock so much. As a non-teaching coach, I can tell you that I go through, especially if I go to a new school, which I did a couple of years ago at Skyline, I went through and asked the athletic department if I could look at the folders that the kids have, academic folders, and read through the 10 years or 8 years or whatever it might be of most of the kids. And I've done it. I worked really hard as a non-teaching coach to make sure that I was plugged in, knowing that I was never going to be plugged in daily like a football coach who walks the halls. And you guys had a non-teaching staff. So that, I think, changes the process a little bit, because there's just things you don't see that if you're in school every day. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I really think it's a benefit if you have at least a teacher on the staff. And we didn't have that. However, when something went a little askew, we knew about it within hours without any, I mean, if something went haywire, we were on what was going on. And the kids knew that. So they weren't out to like pull the wool over anybody's eyes. They knew what was expected. And that was part of the culture that we set up. You know, we're not dealing with, and we told them, we're going to treat you like men, but you have to act like a man. And when, you know, but these are kids and they do stupid things. So you do what you do to get everybody back on the rails.
I've never asked you this question, but I'm curious to ask it now because I think this is a good format in which to ask it. You tend to be a drill sergeant type mentality. And typically with those kind of guys, the old Lombardi guys, typically don't seem to find their way into the friendship of their athletes or maybe respected, not necessarily. You found a way to be that tough guy. At the same time, they seem to love you no matter where you go. That's a really hard, as an assistant coach, that's an unbelievably strong anecdote to have in your bow and arrow, in your quiver. But I'm just, did you ever think of it that way? I'm saying it looking outside in.
I never did, because I was always coached one way. You know, back in the day, I mean, the coach was, there was never any question about what went on. And I kind of softened a little bit over not softened, but I realized that when you set down some rules hard and fast that everybody agrees to, then there's no wiggle room, none at all. And everybody knew that. And we've had some issues over the years where we've had to let captains go because it didn't work out. You do that once and stand by what you said, then ever after, you don't have a problem. You never have a problem. And it was, you know, you start off, you know, a little tough, but you can always back it down. You can't start soft and go the other way. But the kids that I was fortunate enough to coach knew what they were getting into. We were supported 1,000% by the parents and by the administration. So it was really kind of a non-issue. I mean, every once in a while you'd kind of bark, but they knew when things got tough, I'd always have the back. And I was never blindsided by a kid, ever. They were wonderful. They really were.
Fond memory of Clarkston. What was the high point for you? I'm sure there's got to be a couple.
I would say coaching with Frank Kaminskas, Big Papa, who taught me a lot about stuff, life, relationships.
Would Frank be older than you?
Yes. He was about 5 years older than I was.
Okay, so big brother.
Yeah, but really more than that. He was smart in a lot of different ways, and kind in all kinds of ways. But I mean, he could answer your question. You could ask him a question, and he'd start talking, and you figured your question wasn't answered until he was done talking, and then it was like, oh yeah, it was answered. So that was one of my highlights. I would say, I'll tell you what, one of my highlights was finding out that our good friend was going to the Naval Academy. That was a big deal for me.
Well, that was an Oxford thing. We'll get to that. That wasn't a Clarkson thing.
Yeah, but that was a big deal.
Yeah.
That was a big deal.
In terms of Clarkston, was there a game? Was there an anecdote? Was there a position? Was there a point when you kind of knew you guys had arrived? And I say this in the you already mentioned a 3-2 double overtime game with Waterford. And if you know anything about lacrosse, you know that 3-2 is not a very good lacrosse game at any level. And if it went double overtime, it gave you just somehow idea how many ground balls there must have been in the day. Oh, so yeah. Let's go back 15 years or something, which is what we're talking about.
Right.
There had to be something that sort of you knew that you had arrived as a coach.
I would say some of the fond memories were the games for the Cure that we played.
Talk about that. That's a really cool deal.
Yeah, we sat down one night and wanted to get the kids involved in giving back. Everybody talks about it, but it's not a matter of just throwing money at something. We wanted the kids to get involved and have a focus on what was going on. So we came up with the idea of having what we called a game for a cure, where the money would go to cancer research, which was after Frank Sr. had passed away. And as part of that, I came up with the idea that I wanted to have a coach for a day. So for $100, you'd get a polo, and you'd get unfettered access to the coach, which was me, for a whole game. So we'd get them in 2 hours before. We'd get on the chalkboard. Then we'd take them into the locker room and go through what we want to do. And they were on the sidelines. And I forced these guys to make timeout calls and asked them for advice and stuff. And it was very well received. So first year, I think we had maybe 3 coaches for a day. The next year we had 9, and I had to kind of limit it because we had more coaches than we had players at some point. But it was great. It was great to get the dads involved.
One of the things that we ended up doing when I went to Skyline, and this is some other places we tried this, but we brought parents down to work our table. And parents always are critical. And then all of a sudden they're on the sidelines. So here's my question. I had a couple parents who were somewhat critical. We put them on the table, and then they saw the sidelines and how we operated up close. And I remember walking out of the stadium and one coming up to me going, "We had no idea those were the conversations you guys had. Oh my gosh." And then they took it back to the board, or they took it back to the booster club or the coffee klatch, and it sort of permeated. And was there any kind of result with that with when they actually had to be coaches on the sideline?
Oh, absolutely. They when we were done, we'd kind of debrief as the kids were getting undressed and getting ready to go. And I'd take them into the coach's room, which was adjacent to, but not part of the locker room. And you could just see they didn't blink. Their eyes were wide open, right. And they were tired. They were just physically spent from the efforts that, well, better than anybody, that you put in on the sidelines. Sure. So it was, it was good. It was really good. It was very well received, for sure.
We had a timeout call during a very critical game for our league championship 19, and I called it out right in front of the bench. And the referee said, "Wow, that's a good timeout." And the 2 parents that were working for us looked at me and went, "Wow, you get compliments from the officials?" I said, "Well, it's, I didn't solicit it, but it was inside baseball. It was seeing it from a different angle, and it wasn't, it was just a different process."
Right.
So anyway, you had a bunch of years at Clarkston. You obviously finished up your 12 years there. Talk a little bit about the transition, and then we could talk a little bit about, I think you joined us at St. Mary's for a little while.
At Oxford.
Oxford, my mistake. Right.
Yeah, Oxford. My mom passed away 4 years ago, and she passed away in September. And as you would expect, my life kind of took a turn, and things were it was a mess for a while. Not only, grieving from my mom, but now having, responsibility taking care of my dad. So that kind of threw things off and put the travel that I would take to go to Clarkston and the time I would spend scouting and whatever. It really took a back seat to the whole thing. And better than anyone, because you were kind enough to extend a helping hand, that it was difficult. I mean, I love coaching, but my responsibility was to take care of my dad. And so that kind of took a back seat. And for all the time I put in coaching lacrosse, it was difficult for me, very difficult for me to throttle back. I couldn't go 60% coaching. It was either all in the deep end or really nothing. And that's kind of the way things stood for a while. But I mean, you were kind enough to, let me get on your staff and coach when and where I wanted, which was great. I mean, it was the link that I needed to kind of, decompress sometimes. And I'll never forget that. And I'm still very much appreciative for that lifeline you gave me.
The cool part for us was that when I left St. Mary's, I was coaching at Michigan State, and George Port wanted me to either coach at St. Mary's or coach at Michigan State. So I chose that I wanted to stay with the girls at Michigan State. And when I had the opportunity, somebody asked me where I wanted to go. There was several openings. I said, just give me the worst team possible. And it turned out to be Oxford. And I think when I got there, they were 5-90. And you know that better than anybody. And by the time we got towards the end of our tenure there, we ended up losing to Midland in a regional final. And then Midland turned around by 1. And then when we started, we had no middle school program. We had any of that stuff. And one kind of went to work and replaced the country day school that's in town, Kingsbury. And we ended up with about 120 kids in our middle school program. And you were a great part of that success. And having come from, pretty much nothing, I remember having a conversation the very first year with my son, who was a college player, had taken the team a week before. Now, Oxford was on a 2-year losing streak. And I said we'd win 10 games. And you even told me that you thought I was nuts. And we ended up winning, I think, 12 the first year.
Yeah.
But the point is that having the same kind of support at the middle school, then certainly with you at the JV level, I think our progress went faster because we had kids that were coming up that actually knew how to play.
Well, you bring up a good point. A lot of the programs that end up having dads coaching on the JV, just so you've got kids that are playing, but they're not really learning. And the approach we had at Clarkston was, you've got a varsity coach that's coaching the junior varsity, and you're coached like varsity players. So when you move up, there's not that cultural shock. You know what's expected, and you hit the ground running, which, that's the success that you see at Catholic Central, at Brother Rice, all the longstanding programs. That's what they do.
We even took it one step further, and we made our middle school coaches the high school kids, so they would get paid, put an adult in there just to make sure that they got taken care of. But the guys that were coaching the middle school kids, which is why I think we came along so far so fast. And I think part of that was that kids were getting coached by a sport and by people that actually understood the sport. And I think that's something that becomes really important. So you've been out of it now 2 years, 3 years?
2 seasons.
2 seasons?
2 seasons, yeah.
You still go to a lot of games?
Oh yeah.
What do you miss?
I still miss the relationship with the kids and the referees, to be honest with you, and the other coaches. I mean, it was, you see the same referees for 20 years, and it's like old home week. And I miss the competition. I mean, it's in my blood. I love seeing kids compete. I love having my fingerprint on whatever they're doing, good, bad, or indifferent. I like to know that I taught them that, or that's something that we accept, and this is something we don't accept. And it's something that's always with me.
We have a lot of young assistant coaches who are on staffs all over the state and at the high school level. They're all convinced that this is my own personal politics, but I think they're all convinced they should be head coaches yesterday. Mm-hmm. What would you tell a 25, 26, 28-year-old guy that wants to be a head coach someday about taking and having and spending his time and learning that 10,000 hours that we all had to spend at some point? What would you explain to him the importance of the position as it relates to the head coach as a longtime assistant?
Well, I guess I don't give advice, but if I did, I'd tell these guys that it's all glamour when you have your name that says the varsity coach. But when you take that away, the work that's involved in earning that position is completely different. It's taken a family of 25 or 30 kids that have all different interests and trying to get everybody on the same page and trying to get everybody with a oneness of purpose. And that's not the easiest thing to do. And unless you can get their confidence and respect and belief in what you're doing, you can't just yell at them. You got to teach them. Yelling only goes so far. But after a while, you got to teach. And that's what they want. They want to learn. They want to learn. And you're a teacher on the field, and the field is your classroom.
Talk briefly about the term Ohana, which was a huge word that's still used in Clarkston. It was something that you guys came up with. If I'm not mistaken, Ohana means family in Hawaiian. If I'm not mistaken.
Right. Yeah, I was out as you know, we spend a great deal of time on Maui in the winter. And I would come back, and it was about 7 or 8 years ago when a guy named Colt McCoy, I think, was the starting quarterback at the University of Hawaii. And they had a press conference for all the Hawaiian Islands, and he was deciding on whether he was going to turn pro his junior year or come back and finish his senior year. And this was on at 6 o'clock. It was 6 o'clock at night on the all the Hawaiian TV shows, stations, and it was a huge press conference. And he came out with his fellow seniors, his coaches were behind him, and he went through his decision-making process, what he was going to do and why he was going to do it. And the bottom line to his whole deal was he didn't want to let down his ohana, which was, it literally means family, but it's more than that. It's more than his mom and his dad. It was the people that supported him through the years.
The village.
And I thought, yeah. And I thought, that's powerful. And you're always kind of looking for, like a catchphrase or something that gets somebody's attention. So when I came back, I talked to Brian about this, and he said, go for it. So we had our pre-season meeting after we had chosen the varsity, junior varsity, but before we had taken our first practice. And I brought him into, I think it's called the LGI, the large group room. We sat everybody down, and I put the freshmen in front, sophomores next, juniors and seniors at the back. And I said, here's the deal. This is what we're doing. The guys in the back are watching the guys in front of them. The juniors are watching the sophomores, and the sophomores are watching the freshmen, because we are now Ohana. This is our family. This is what we're going to do. And everybody's going to take care of each other. And we're going to push this thing through, and we're going to do it. And they bought into it. And I mean, that's all I hear out there now. It's on their shooting shirts. It's on their shorts. It's all over the place. So it's something that had some legs. And I think it's not you don't want to be trite and, kind of a flippant thing, but it makes some sense. And people that have spent any time in Hawaii know that it's a special thing. It's a real special thing. And I'm glad it stuck with them. Maybe that's my legacy there.
The last question to sort of wrap things up, and I'm just curious, you see the landscape that is now high school lacrosse, which is what this organization represents. Just want to get any thoughts on where you think we are, where we're headed, if there's such an animal, are we headed down the right path? And I'm not talking about pandemic related. I'm just talking in general over the last couple of years. What's your thoughts?
I'm impressed with the quality of athletes. That I think there are more better lacrosse players throughout the state. It's not just the big two and the little 150 or whatever it is. There's a lot of good teams. I am concerned about the future of lacrosse as it relates to like pay for play in the off season. I'm not naming names, but these teams that will take varsity or junior varsity players in the off season and go all over the country and play these tournaments and charge the parents a fortune and tell the parents at the end that your kids are the greatest thing since popcorn. It's the greatest lacrosse player I've ever seen. And oh, by the way, you owe me an extra $500. You got to pay. I'm finding that is kind of a self-defeating thing. It's kind of like the AAU in basketball. And I think that might be going down a dangerous path. I think you put yourself in competition with the varsity coach, who is more apt to tell the parent what's going on because there's not a financial interest in what's going on. And if I could give somebody some advice, I would talk to the guys that have some power with the MHSAA and see if they can maybe tamp this down a little bit, because it's getting bigger, it's getting more expensive, and it's clearly become the have and the have-nots. I mean, there's a lot of good players that can't afford $1,500 to $2,000 in the summer to go play.
Sure.
I mean, it's not good. It's really not good.
Well, I wanted to do three things. And one of the first is I want to say thank you for spending some time with us. I really do appreciate it. I also think that finally our association has decided to honor assistant coaches, because there's not a program that's been successful in this state that doesn't have great assistant coaches who make it valuable. And I think the time and effort that you put in is certainly every bit as that as a head coach. So you're the first honoree in the assistant coaching Michigan High School Lacrosse Coaches Association. So I think that's pretty special. You were nominated by Brian Kamiskas, who is the Hall of Fame chairman at the moment. So I think that's something that, he says that says a lot about you. We certainly endorsed it 3,000%, because we know, a lot of times be surprised. Sometimes there's a 6-1 vote. It's not always unanimous, because there's reasons for all kinds of things. And it's never about somebody's being a good guy or a bad guy. Sometimes it's do they have enough criteria to make a particular, hey, he only coached 6 years, that type of thing. So it's not, but I just think it's really terrific that you're getting the opportunity to be part of the class of 2021. You've meant a lot to the sport. You've meant a lot to me in terms of friends and just colleagues and working through some stuff. So I think it's a well-deserved honor, and one that I think will resonate to a lot of people that, if you see there's a chance to be honored for something, sometimes you work harder. I'm not sure that that's completely true, but well-deserving, Doug, and I just wanted to thank you for taking the time.
I want to thank you. I can't end this without thanking Dave White, without thanking Brian Kamiskas, without thanking Frank Kamiskas, and without thanking you. I've been blessed to coach under 4 Hall of Famers, and to me, that's unbelievable. I mean, I've been blessed, and I know it. And I can't thank you guys enough for your friendship, your camaraderie, and all the great times that we had. I'll never, ever, ever forget it, ever.